How do you set up your podcast Twitter so that a listener can actually find and listen to your show? Once a listener's listening to your show, how do they know who you are and what you're going to talk about? This is Podcast Creators, where we get podcasting advice from real podcasters. On today's show, we have Steph Fuccio, creator of the Geopats podcast network, creator of the podcast matchmaker, Podrevday, a YouTube channel, a newsletter, and so much more. Steph is going to answer these questions. We get in depth on so many great things, and it's a lot of fun. I'm your host, Greg, creator of Indie Drop-In Network and co-host of the Fan Dummies podcast. Today's interview is recorded on Riverside FM. If you like the way this looks and sounds, I have an affiliate link in the description below so you can click and try it out for yourself. We will also put all the links to everything that we talk about today down in the description box below. All right, let's get to it. Steph, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you. This is a long time coming. You know, I think I reached out to you first for this show.
On Twitter, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I thought I need some help to start this off. Like, there's no way I can just like go with someone who has no podcasting experience, has no interview experience. Like, I need Steph to help me with this.
Aww. Oh, thank you. That's really sweet to say. Well, I'm super pleased to be here. So thank you for the invite.
Yeah, no problem. I think our schedules had to line up, which means I don't think this will come out first, but we're going to try to scoot this in early in the chain, I think.
Either way. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a lot of good stuff to talk about. So why don't we start with just a quick intro so people know who you are and kind of what you work on.
Quick. Yeah, sure. All right. I've been practicing, so let's see if this works. So hi, I'm Steph Fuccio. I'm founder of Podcast Review Day, also known as Podrevday, which has recently slightly rebranded to a bigger umbrella of podcast matchmakers, because we're doing more than just the once a month event on Twitter on the 8th of every month. I also have a bunch of podcasts that I lump under the Geopats podcast network that includes a lot of my living outside of the US globalness. And I also write about podcasting, and I'm a podcast editor, and I'm basically obsessed with the medium, and I'm now actually making a living off of it, which sounds kind of cool, but yet kind of strange because I never thought it would happen.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that significantly because I think, I've got a tweet right now. I mean, people who are watching this later won't be able to see it, but I've got a tweet right now that basically says retweet if you want to, retweet if you're doing this for a hobby, hit heart. Yeah. And so far, nobody has retweeted, but there are lots of hearts. So, I think when you ask people about podcasting, they're always like, oh, it's a hobby. Me and my buddy Joseph are, talking on the mic. But really, when you get down to it, I think most people would like for at least it to pay for itself.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with either scenario.
Right.
It's just a matter of if you're doing it just for the money versus trying to, pay for the podcast or pay for your life existence. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack with all of that.
One thing that I like to start off with is what I consider a bad question. People give me crap for this question, but I think it's so important because new podcasters, it's the search for this stuff. It's the number one question in every group, right?
For sure.
So what microphone are you talking on now, and what equipment do you use to podcast?
Yep. It's been massively simplified during COVID because I had to move around more than I would like. But right now I've got a Samsung Q2U. Yeah. Love it. It's especially good with women because it doesn't artificially raise your voice. Like if you have a bassy voice, it doesn't make you squeaky. I don't know why the other mics do that. Well, I mean, there's a technical reason, but anyway, Samsung Q2 is beautiful. I have this fella. These I have them in different colors. The mic cover, I use it instead of a pop screen because I like color. Normally it's like pink or orange or whatnot, but it's been summer, it's been hot, and I've been gloomy, so I've had gray on there for a while. And honestly, I record on either Hindenburg or Audacity if I have to, or a program like Riverside or StreamYard, or I'm trying out Zencaster, so something like that. I used to, in the before time, remember when we used to interview people in person?
Oh, yeah.
I used to have 2 Samsung Q2s and a Focusrite i2i to plug them into so that I could control it a bit more. Yeah. But I got rid of a lot of that in the moves, and I'll probably get some new mics when we move again in a few months, and I'm not sure about the in-person thing for a while yet. But when I do, I'm going to play with probably, what's that new Zoom 4H4, the one with
the PodTrack P4, is that what it's called?
I want to try that out. But time, place, situation, pandemic, all that needs to align in order for that to happen. But right now, it's just basically the mic.
Yeah. And you use USB to your computer?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It sounds really great. And the Samsung Q2U is, I mean, what is it, $50? $75?
It was less than 50 when I bought it a few years ago, and I think during the pandemic supplies got a little bit desperate, so it went up to 70 something. Yeah. But it's such a good mic. You cannot know a lot about what you're doing and not even experiment a lot and still sound great.
Yeah, it's an absolute steal of a microphone.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you host your show? Like, what's your
Captivate? And I love them. Yeah. They're wonderful. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great platform.
It really is. And I have a lot of podcasts, and I used to have to like log into each account to do things. And with Captivate, you can host as many as you want. They go more by downloads than by how many podcasts. So I can host a ton of average podcasts for the same price. And so that's what I do. And it's all on the same platform. They're really good with marketing. The community's great. I could go about this forever. I really like them.
Yeah, but you gave me the perfect transition, because where I want to start is the Geopats podcast network, because what I learned in just, doing a little research, because I know about Podrevday, I know about the podcast matchmaker. That's where I have my experience, but I never, I'm not a Geopat, so I never looked into that side of things. But what I learned is that you're a serial podcaster. And you have, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 shows under this kind of umbrella.
Under Geopats, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are visible, yeah.
Oh no.
Oh no.
So just to make an impact here, I just want to read them. So language, podcasting, coffee, books, online, reflections, NaPodPoMo, which I have no idea what that means.
I want to tell you about that when you're
I want to hear it.
Okay.
Yeah, tell me what first. Just tell me what that means.
National Podcast Posting Month, which is hard to say but easy to do. It's 30 days of posting. Usually it's mini podcasts because it's 30 days in a row. It's every month, and it's a really beautiful community hosted by Jennifer Navarrete, and it's on Facebook, and you can find the website too. It's amazing. I did it 2 years in a row.
That's great. Now are you on all these podcasts? Because the couple that I listened to, you were the host.
Yeah, I am the host. And there's the podcast matchmakers, the simple podcast editing are outside of Geopats. And then I had Creatively Complicated that I co-hosted with writer Summer Rylander that isn't online right now, but I want to put back there, but we're not going to keep it going. It kind of went its course. Yeah, sure. So I like experimenting. That's the thing. And I have a lot of different interests. Mm-hmm. So usually there's 1 or 2 that are going at a time, and then they'll branch off into something else. But I don't want to get rid of the other ones.
Yeah. So this is why I wanted to start with this, because my recommendation for podcasters, which you've probably seen me tweet about, I'm fairly passionate about it. You should just have one podcast. Now I know that's absurd because I have 4, but I don't create content for all of mine. So I think I get a little pass, but is there a podcast that's the primary? Tell me how you manage this. And then we're going to get into some advice for indie creators. But first, What's it like having, 7, 8, 9, have you mentioned? All these podcasts?
Well, like I said, a lot of them are not actively running. There are some
Okay.
of them that will probably never have episodes again.
Okay.
The main ones right now, and I usually only have about 2 or 3 that are active at any one time. And I do think that's too many. But I've also not worked full time for about 3 years, 3 or 4 years. So I've had the luxury of having a lot of free time to work on this. Yeah. But right now, the primary ones are podcast matchmakers and the simple podcast editing. And both of them are leaning towards, well, obviously they're both about podcasting, and they're both invested in what I'm still calling my freelance life, which is quickly turning into a business. So they're both very focused. So they're kind of monetarily focused, but they're also community focused. So there's a lot of momentum that's not mine there, which helps.
Maybe we can start with the Podcast Matchmakers show.
Okay.
Right. When you started that, did you create a launch plan? How did you decide that you wanted to make it a podcast? Because it's also a video, right? It's also on YouTube. But
yeah,
walk us through the beginning of that, the brainstorming, the execution.
Yeah. And this is where I need a little bit of rebranding, because I keep saying, oh, everything's so messy. I just do stuff and then I tidy it up as I go. And I'm not sure it's quite as messy as I keep saying, but I definitely ride the tide. And I do things as they organically come up, and then I strategically work on them.
Sure.
So the podcast review day started first, and then it took a long time because I thought it would kind of dwindle away. I didn't think the event itself would keep going, but it did. And then I was like, well, it's hard to organize people on Twitter, so let me do a newsletter. And we're talking a couple of years in. I was like, let me try a newsletter. And the newsletter started, and I was watching some folks read a newsletter as a podcast, and I thought that'd be good. Then some people could read and some people could listen.
Right.
And so the first few episodes that are up there now, but I don't think they're going to stay there, are me and a co-host reading the newsletter, which I quickly found out I suck at reading stuff that's written verbatim. And honestly, not many other people were good at it. So then we tried just kind of hitting the notes of the newsletter, and that stunk too. So then I tried interviewing people just about a certain type of category, and that was better, but it wasn't quite the magic I was hoping for.
Right.
And the latest rendition is more like the old school dating game, which very few people know about because it's from like the 1970s, and I lose a lot of people when I say that. So it's more of well, you were on it, Greg. Can you help me describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to describe it is you get a contestant, and then you go out and source podcasts based on their criteria. And then those podcasts submit an episode. You listen to it. The person listens to it, and then they decide which one they like the best.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because one of the things I think that make The Bachelor or any of these type of choosing shows interesting is the drama. And I think with Podcast Matchmaker, that's a sensitive issue, right? Because
it is, yeah.
Because all of the podcasts you really want people to listen to. And I think, you shifted gears kind of halfway through that episode, and I really thought that was smart, where you said, this one might be good for you, but for others looking for this type of thing, here you go. So it turned into like a viewer participation effort as well, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we prefaced it at the beginning, like, this is what this listener would want to listen to right now. But as we went on, even having her pick, and I was so lucky that Melissa was was very flexible, very honest.
Right.
To be like, I don't want to pick one. I don't know. I want to pick more than one. And it was really uncomfortable to narrow it down and to make a winner, so to speak. And I was like, fine, let's not do that.
Yeah.
Because let's just talk about what's good about them. I mean, that's primarily what we do at Podcast Review Day, the event anyway. So why not just flood them with goodness? Like what is the pull about what you're seeing in the Twitter accounts? What's the pull of the audio? Like what's the good stuff? Anybody can critique, and you know this as a creator. We know our own faults as creators. We know what we've done wrong a lot of the times. So why not focus on the good stuff? So that's hopefully what we ended up doing. But so it's more 3 times already, and it's only 20 some episodes in. So it's changed a lot. I don't know if I answered your question.
No. I think it's perfectly fine, because the idea is really for the indie creator to just get a sense of what it's like to start a show. And, context is everything. And that's kind of the point here is, I think hopefully some creators will say, oh man, I'm just like Steph, like my show started one way. I liked it, but didn't love it. So I changed it. Then I liked it still, but didn't love it. So I'm changing it. What type of advice would you give a creator for this process?
To let that happen. There's this book called The Creative Curve, which is amazing. And he literally talks about like where your project is going to be, where it's going to be, and where you are at the beginning. And the pain of knowing that it's not there until it finally gets there. And can you push through that pain? And how do you push through that pain? Because you've got the idea or the feeling or the motivation or the drive or the community. There's something that's motivating you. But to keep seeing the creations not there yet until they're there is really hard. And I think that's why a lot of pod fade happens. It's 1, I didn't know it would take this much time. But 2, it's not what I want it to be.
Do you think a creator can ever really realize that picture that's in their head?
Yeah, but I think it probably changes then too. So it's not a static thing.
Yeah. I mean, even in my show, we're in at 150 episodes, and even still I listen to episodes and I think that wasn't really what I had in mind. Where we want to provide value changes from time to time. And I think it's just I think it's a funny way of how podcasting is unique. For a TV show, you have to you pick something and stick with it. You have to, and it either works or it doesn't. You get canceled or you get renewed. But a podcast has that luxury to kind of shift and morph.
It's so true. And as an indie podcaster, we don't really have a lot of limiters. Like we can do whatever we want, and that's overwhelming sometimes.
The other problem though is we don't have any external stimuli to know if we're on track, which I know is something you do. So maybe we can talk about, how do you know if your show is any good? My
initial intent was because there's a lot of people doing audits that are great and they're in depth, and they're like, you could take the audit that they give you and spend all year fixing your podcast and fixing's not a good word, polishing your podcast and making it better. And it's well worth whatever you pay for it. They're great. But what I wanted for the podcast matchmakers community is something a little more iterative, like 2 or 3 things that you can change pretty quickly to help the folks who are going to find you on Twitter to go from your Twitter account to listening, to being a listener, to being a fan. So I wanted to kind of point out things that might disrupt that from happening. So it's a really specific, quick, inexpensive audit where you can get super actionable things. So I'm viewing it not as an industry professional, even though I guess I kind of am.
Sure.
But I'm doing it as a listener experience audit. So I'm doing it as, I'm a listener. I'm looking at your Twitter profile, if that's one you pick, right? And what are the things that are pulling me in and making me want to press play? Do you have a listen link where I can press play on Twitter, or am I going to have to skip platforms? You know, and I'm listening to the podcast and I'm literally writing like what I hear in the intro. What does it make me think?
Mm-hmm.
What am I hearing in the body? What am I thinking? What questions do I have? And these are like the listener reactions that I'm giving people in the audits. And can I tell you something?
Please.
It is ridiculously fun to do because it's not correction so much as it's
identification
and a listener reaction. Like I'm engaging, even though it's on a spreadsheet, I'm engaging with the podcaster. And so it's kind of a conversation in a spreadsheet form.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting because there were things in there like, do you have a clear call to action? Mm-hmm. Is it clear who this podcast is for? Mm-hmm. Is it clear what this podcast is about? Mm-hmm. Right. And there are so many podcasts I listen to and, my genres for indie drop-in, are like true crime and comedy and scary stuff. But so I listen to mostly that for the show. And, 10 minutes in, I'm not certain if they're talking about a Sasquatch or aliens. Yeah. Right. And I think it's so important for some external person, because I've been there. You leave those sessions recording and you're high-fiving. We just made gold. All we have to do is be discovered, and we're going to be the next Adam Carolla because we're just hilarious. And, it's the best thing that we've ever heard. And I'm trying hard because I care about these people and I want to promote their show. I'm trying hard not to turn it off. So, there's this huge disconnect between the reality of the creator when the creation is done and the listener. So, to me, Podcast Matchmaker is more than just trying to find the right person. Maybe I can say that a little better. So, to me, the matchmaking process, I think you have a couple of really interesting things. One is, yes, the listener, like Melissa specifically, was amazing hearing her real thoughts as she's listening to clips, right? And the funny thing is we can engineer those clips to be our best, our best representation, right? So it's the headline of the podcast. But then the audit I almost think is more useful because you have no idea if you can remember what the Patreon link is when you get to the end of the podcast. Can a listener even remember that? Because no one's taking notes in their car or while they're doing dishes, right? Like, did you deliver the value you set out to in a podcast? And I just think that maybe podcasters don't want to know that, but I'm certain that most of them don't know that.
They don't, and I thought it would feel a little bit like red penning when I did the beta version. Like I didn't want to come across as a know-it-all. I didn't want to come across as a corrector. I wanted to come across as like trying to help people get the listeners they wanted. Not being super famous, not being, super rich, but just getting their audience. I wanted to help match those up by sprucing them up. And the response has been wild. Like people are like, I never thought of that, because we need other people to look at our stuff, to listen to our stuff, but we can't keep begging our friends and family because they don't know what to look for. They're not always podcast listeners and they're not objective at all. They like us. They're not going to tell us this stuff.
And surveys, like we do surveys on Fan Dummies and the response is less than 1%. So you have to have a lot of listeners to get 10 surveys.
Yeah. Or a giveaway, which can be expensive.
Right. Yeah. Right. So in your audits, or maybe just even in your experience, what do you think are maybe the top couple of things that these creators should be doing that they're not? Yeah.
Oh man, that falls into the things I saw during podcast review day that made me start the audits, which is not having an easy to find listen link, giving somebody a link tree where it takes them 3 clicks to get to listening to you. You're going to lose a lot of people. I know link trees are really popular and they hold a lot of information, but if you just had a listen link in your pinned tweet and people could click right there and listen in Twitter, you're much more likely, I think, not scientifically proven yet, but I think you're much more likely to pull them in with your voice and get them. So just having a listen link that's really quick.
Yeah.
Don't make them click through times. Honestly, personality, either in the background image or in the description. People keep putting links in their description. There's a link section of your Twitter profile. Use that for your link. Use your bio for you. Podcasts, Greg, you know this, are very personality driven.
Right.
Get elements of your personality in those images and in the bio. People will connect with you personally and want to hear you.
So what about in the shows? Yeah. So let's say you can get them to convert from Twitter. And you're listening to a couple of shows. What are some misses that are easy to correct?
Yeah. And this is not any one podcast.
Sure.
This is the majority of the ones I'm hearing don't have something for new listeners. Like in the intro, they just dive in. And as a new listener, we don't know who we're listening to. We don't know a quick, 10-second what the podcast is about or what the episode's about, or who we're, like, the names of the people. Something as simple as like introducing or calling each other by name if there's more than one person.
Yeah.
Or the takeaways. A lot of people put not just their call to action at the end, which very few people get to, but they'll put what it's about at the end. And it's okay if you record like that, but in post, just move it to the front. Because the gems in most podcast episodes are at the end.
Yeah. So
just shift it around to move it to the beginning, and I think your listeners will be more inclined to stick with you and to know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Like on this show that we're on right now, Podcast Creators, I create the intro after the interview because I have no idea what's going to come up. We need an executive summary, essentially. So I think that's a very, very helpful tip. So let's kind of get into Podrevday a little bit. And I want to talk about how effective that's been. What reviews have you seen that were helpful? Kind of just give me the whole lay of the land on Podrevday.
This is exciting. Okay, so since it started let's start January 2020.
Yeah.
Such an odd time to start something, right? It technically it started in December, but in a different form. That was Podrev month because I was doing a challenge after Now Pod Pomo. I wanted to do a month of reviews, and that was exhausting. So then we switched to once a month, and that's when it became Podrev Day.
Yeah.
So January of 2020 to now. Again, it's on Twitter, so all of my data is Twitter oriented. We've had over 1 million impressions. Now that's not people participating. That's not tweets. It's people that have participated or viewed or liked or retweeted. We've had the potentiality of 1 million people being exposed to Podrevday. Now that's the numbers. In reality, I tend to focus more on engagement than I do numbers any day of the week. I've been locked out of Apple Connect for a couple of weeks now, and it drives me crazy because I don't like being locked out of things, but I also am not the type of person who checks my consumption data regularly. So on the other hand, I don't care.
But it had to generate newsletter signups because I know that was one call to action that you at least request from people for Podrevday is, hey, sign up to the newsletter.
Yeah.
It hasn't?
Nope.
Really?
Nope.
Wow.
The audits are now, because part of the audit, especially the beta and the free, because there's still a free version out there, those people automatically become newsletter subscribers.
Yeah.
But I think because of the pace of Twitter, it's not quite getting out there in the way that I think would be most productive.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the newsletter has gone through a lot of changes because I wasn't quite sure who was paying attention. And for the longest time, I didn't realize it was mostly podcasters who were listeners who were involved in the community. I kept thinking, okay, listeners, let's go, not realizing they were also hardcore indie podcasters who were very time strapped. So it took me a while to figure out who was in the community.
How is the newsletter going? Like in general, is it growing or do you think it's a successful experiment? Is it a failed experiment?
It's growing now. And the nice thing is our open rate is ridiculous. It's like 50, 60%.
Yeah, that's great.
And our click rate's going up. So although we were stagnating for a while as far as new subscribers before the audit, now we're growing. But the open rate, click rate, all of those things are very high, apparently, for a newsletter. So the people that are engaging with it are engaging with it.
Yeah.
And again, that's my happy word is engagement.
Sure.
I prefer a dedicated community over a wide community any day of the week.
Yeah. I think that's a smart way to look at it. Now, how do you suggest a podcaster gets reviews? Because, I see all sorts of weird schemes going on to get reviews, but how would you suggest they get real listener interaction for reviews?
Yeah, this is going to seem counterproductive, but there's this thing, and it's not an app. It's not a platform. It's called social listening, and apparently it's a marketing term that's getting a little buzz recently. And it's literally just, you know how when you're eavesdropping, you're in a restaurant or a cafe, and you're hearing people around you and you're listening to what they're talking about? Yeah. It's doing that on the socials. And when you find people who are talking about the content that you like and that your podcast is talking about, join in on the conversation. Talk to those people.
Interesting. So really what you're saying is the only way to get reviews is really to get people to listen to the podcast. Like that's what you're trying to do. If you find people that are engaged in your content and they start listening to your content, and you'll probably want to let them know that it's an option to review and could you review? And if they comment to you in the engage, oh, hey, I listened to your episode, Yeah. Honestly, when people send me a comment in a DM or a Gmail, stuff like that, I say, hey, could you take a minute to copy and paste that comment over to Podchaser? I'll ask them to go move the review. But the reason why they've sent that DM or that email is because there was something that resonated in the episode that they wanted to reach out and say, hey, thanks, or hey, I have this, or I want to answer that question that you asked that might have been hypothetical, but I want to answer it anyway. Sure. And so it's that being part of the conversation and listening to what people want to be discussing about those topics. And if it matches what you are, I hate to use the word match, but that's the whole reason why it's named Podcast Matchmakers. Hey, brand away. I don't think there's a discoverability problem because there are people looking for podcasts now. Podcasts have reached a level where people are looking. Sure. And there are people who want listeners. And I think it's more of having them be in the same spot, talking to each other and sharing, not just saying, listen, but talking to each other and listening to each other. Yeah, I don't believe people use Twitter correctly. I mean, most of the podcasters I follow, which is all of my followers are podcasters because that's my market. Right. I would say my feed is 99%, check out my episode, right? When really what I would expect is the finance people to be talking all about finance, the movies people to be talking all about movies, and they don't, which I think is really interesting. So I hope they take your advice to heart because it would totally shift how they interact with Twitter. Well, and the keywords alone of them talking about their content would help other people find them. Yeah. I mean, that's, you be in your content area. I understand it's nice to have podcasting communities. I'm in far too many of them myself, but you also need to, don't you want to talk to people who are talking about the things you're talking about? That's a lot of talking. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's, if you follow Fandummies, what you'll notice is that we don't tweet a lot, but what we tweet about is like Star Wars and Marvel, and because it's what we like, right? And what I've learned the hard way, from podcasting for a while now, is that Twitter and all social media is the worst notification method of a new podcast that exists on the planet. Yeah. You will get no reach on a post that says, "Here's my new episode." Nor should you. Yeah. There's no information in that. Yeah. There's no way to interact with it. There's no social for the social media, so to speak. That brings me to really something I'm curious about. And whenever I run across creators that have newsletters, I really want to ask, do you think that all podcasters should have a newsletter and use that newsletter for the notification purposes of new episodes and what happens over the course of the week, that sort of use case?
I never say yes to all, because I think that's leaning towards shoulds, and it's too creative of a medium to lean in that direction.
Right.
However, from someone who's jumped from project to project, I know I have lost people who I've connected with, and they don't know what I'm doing currently.
Yeah.
And for me, I wish I had started the newsletter early.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's just been a month in, or just a monthly experience where I'm like, here's what I've done this month.
Sure.
Even if it was just that, just so people could be exposed to the different things that I'm doing as the years went by, as the projects go by. Because we all think, this is my podcast, it's never going to change. That is the quickest way to think of 5 others you want to start. And then, yeah.
That makes your next shower podcast specific. Like, when I'm in the shower, I leave the shower wanting to start like 20 podcasts. Oh
my God. I have an entire area in Notion for ideas that I'm not allowed to do for a good few weeks after they come out of me. Because I'm like, I could start a new podcast every day. I thought of 3 new ones last week alone. And I'm like, no, you're not allowed until you get the ones that you're currently doing running themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I get so many DMs where people are like, hey, do you think this is a good idea? And I just say, yes, but not for you. Because based on your show, I think it's really good. And if you split your time between your show and another show, your really good show that you spent a year making really good is going to suffer.
Yeah.
Now, if you're done with the really good show and it's run its course, and you're no longer into Conan the Barbarian or whatever it is that you talk about, like the ship has sailed on Buffy the Vampire Slayer or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Totally cool. Like let's sunset that, and then we can I'll help you launch the other one, whatever you need. But if you spent 40 hours on a single podcast, you wouldn't be able to get everything done in a week.
Wait, what? 40 hours?
Yeah. If you spend
do video, so that makes sense.
Even on audio, only podcasts, if you spend 40 hours working on a single podcast, you will not get all of the things done that you should be doing.
So you're including from idea of an episode to guesting to organizing to emails for like everything.
Everything for everything that it takes to create, produce, and promote a single episode. 40 hours.
Yeah.
I think is the minimum, is what it takes.
I don't disagree with you. I have consciously tracked and stopped tracking how long it takes per episode because it got too much, and I like being in denial.
Well, what happens is you stop doing some things that don't work, or you think don't work, right? Like we don't post on Facebook really anymore, right? It just we don't get the engagement, and we'd rather focus on Instagram, right? We don't we don't do news episodes anymore because they had low, they just didn't resonate with our audience like we should. So so there's all sorts of things you can stop doing to reduce the amount of time that it takes. Yeah. But if you're doing any sort of research for an episode, right? Like that alone takes a huge amount of time. And if you're writing show notes and transcripts afterward, it just never ends.
You just brought up something that I think gets talked about so little, is that looking at your episodes, not just consumption data or downloads, but what's working and not working for you, the people in it, and what you're getting feedback on or engagement on, and altering the podcast, and that awful thing after the first few months of maintenance of going back and making sure that your show notes are still relevant. You don't have links that have died or what have you, and going back and making sure like what you've learned since then, that you kind of clean things up along the way. That is my biggest growing pain. Even 4 years in, there's a lot of maintenance I still need to do on a lot of episodes, but it's extremely hard to work that in because you don't have the new episode joy to go, I want to make this look really good before it goes out.
It's just work.
Yeah, it's just work because you go back and you fix it. And it's like, okay, this was from 4 years ago. Who's going to notice that it's better now than yesterday?
Yeah, the messed up thing about that, which it's all our psyche messing with us, right? Because it's just not fun. But there are a significant amount of people that start from episode 1.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that work, they're going to abandon you on episode 4. And nobody wants that. Everybody wants listeners. But I think that is an amazing place to stop. Yeah. I can't imagine a better recommendation for indie podcasters than to go back and make sure all your stuff is working.
Clean up your stuff. And then tell me how you did it so I can go back and do mine.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That would be an amazing service. Like a podcast housekeeper.
No, because I think, okay, I agree with you, it would be, but on the other hand, I think there's it can inform your newer podcast looking at what you did wrong or differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could, you're right. You're right. It could do that also. But I think link maintenance and, going back and making sure your transcripts are there and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's just kind of busy work that maybe you could outsource. I bet you somebody on Fiverr would do that for you. But
you could do one of the deeper audits that other folks do, because they do those. There's all kinds of packages where they'll even look at like your Google ranking, and they'll look at your bit rates and all kinds of things, and do like the deep read of your podcast and its technicalness.
Yeah, that might be good for a show. I think for a show of a specific size that can afford something like that, it's probably good. Help you
definitely.
And
it's been around for a while. You definitely can't do that in your first couple of months. There just isn't enough data yet.
Yeah. And your show might not even stay the same, as we've pointed out.
Exactly.
So maybe tell everybody where they can find you.
Yes, and here's where I have to spell because my name is not common. It's not common in the U.S. My website is Steph Fuccio. It's STEPHFUCCIO.com. All my podcast services, information, publications, contact info, it's all there.
Beautiful. And I'll put all the links in the description and show notes below so that everybody can find you. They don't have to remember it. And thank you so much for being on the show. This was super fun. It was a great way to spend my morning coffee, and I really appreciate it.
I love that plug. That was great. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been wonderful.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much to Steph Fuccio for being on the show. I think we got some amazing insights, not just for setting up Twitter or understanding what should be in your show from a call to action, but all sorts of great stuff about newsletters and using Twitter to generate content and all sorts of really fun things. We'll put links to everything we talked about today in the description below, so if you're trying to find me or Stephanie or anything that we talked about, it'll be down there. And of course, we talked to lots of other podcast creators. You just have to look up here in the boxes and click one. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.